Absolutely. All right, let's be sure folks can see a little bit. Does that work for people? Okay. So, as Sandy brought up, another thing that you guys all seemed quite interested in was visualizing some of this historical material in some kind of visual or interactive timeline or kind of mapping, visual mapping. So let's do.
I saw that they're saying more about like historical chronology.
Right.
It seemed like it was a piece of this.
Right.
It was more the theme than the timeline was for a kind of for the mass.
Right, you're right. Yes, sort of chronology. Many of you did research going all the way back to sort of 17th and 18th century. Many of you are more interested in the kind of here and now. How do we think about the kind of scope of time that we've got? Ariel, you wanted to contribute something?
Well, I have. I was on my computer last night going through old files, and I found in my hard drive this like 12-page document, which is a timeline of Puerto Ricans in Philadelphia with additional reading that I'd be willing to sort of share. We can use that as sort of like a starting place, and we can either add to it, or most likely what's going to happen is stuff is going to get cut out, because this timeline starts with like the Age of Discovery, and it doesn't stop until like 2000 something. Yeah, and it's something that Johnny Irizarry, put together many, many years ago, and I've sort of updated it here and there. But it's a tool that we can use to sort of start to hone in on some of the key events, and then hopefully we can find visual materials and audio materials that would complement the sort of written word. So I can share that with, you, Flora, and Beth, and maybe we can distribute that to folks. So I'll send that out like this week to you guys.
I think this is particularly tough, actually, timelines, because although I am very interested in timelines, I think it's I'll be very curious and interested in what people have to say. I'm presenting it in a visual and interesting way, because I just see it as a real challenge. So I'm curious about what people with more artistic bents or whatever comes out with presenting a timeline in an interesting way for those people who don't particularly like to look at timelines.
Sure. Well, a lot of you responded to the material in the African American Museum and the way they presented it.
Yes, that was yes.
So that's beyond just your traditional date.
But that was very technical, and that seems very expensive.
Good point.
Well, it was good. Though.
Maybe not. I don't know, but it sure was very well, very professionally done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mona.
So I've seen it two different ways. The National Museum of American Jewish History. By the way, I also just wanted to comment, Esperanza, the middle school, actually had a connection with the museum and displayed a project called My Home, My History for the last several years, which was very successful because you had museum folks all examining this exhibit. But back to this. So the museum has a timeline on every floor. But it also has U.S. history, so there's a U.S. history and a world history timeline right next to it. So that's one way, and it is, of course, you're going through an exhibit, so it's kind of boring by itself, except if you're interested in timelines. It's not boring because you see what's happening elsewhere. The major way that I've seen it done very effectively is by the Gilder Lehrman. Used to have an amazing. They were storyboard, like boards, like they were panels, screens. That's the word, screens. And on it they would place a timeline, but then they would also have photographs, text, art. So you place it, and I only know it in the context of a school. So schools would borrow it, place it in their hallways, and so all the students, all the guests, everyone actually gets to see. You can keep moving it. Goes to another school. It would go to another school. But a very interesting timeline in that it wasn't isolated the timeline, but also on the same panel had highlights of whatever the topic was on that panel. Did that make sense to you, what I just said?
I think so. So this idea of something that is portable.
So you'd have individuals on the timeline who were being highlighted. You would have art or photographs of pieces of a particular concept they were trying to highlight for that particular theme, because they had them on many different themes.
I have a follow-up question. So the
Yes.
art that you're talking about, is that the art that was created during the time in question, or is this art from the students
So-
reflecting on the past?
No, it's, so the Gilder Lehrman one, only the one that I've actually
Sure.
have experience with, had a theme. So, or for example, the American Revolution.
Okay.
And so the timeline was there, different events, photographs of particular, obviously artwork that was, because there's artwork of a place, a person, an event was highlighted with that time period.
I like
Is that's clear?
Yeah, I like that.
I wanted to also highlight Eastern State Penitentiary has a timeline. When you are outside in that courtyard and they have the structure where it's how many years people have been incarcerated, and you can probably add a lot more. And that's an ongoing, correct me if I'm wrong, that every few years, and it's comparing the United States to other countries, but the United States in 1960, whatever, to present day. So it's, the beautiful thing about that is it's ongoing. It doesn't end. So again, we can interest the youth because let's talk about migration right now. How did specific events increase or decrease migration? Like for example, with the hurricane or whatever.
Okay.
I wasn't going to say, because I've already heard enough about Eastern State Penitentiary, but yeah, that bar graph, which represents decades, for us has worked really well. Partially because of the scale of it, it's 16 feet tall, and there isn't a ton of information on it. It's pared down. We stole the idea from Ellis Island. All good ideas in museums are stolen from somewhere else. I want to have a session at a conference today called The Best Idea I Ever Stole, by the way. Just every last one I stole. That one was inspired by a much, much smaller bar graph at Ellis Island that showed rates of immigration by nationality, but also by time. So it's actually several bar graphs, and you can see as the Italian is rising, the Irish is dropping off. You know, these bar graphs are all side by side. Theirs was the size of the tabletop. But it's cool, you can walk around and you can see these patterns over time, very simplified. So we went with one bar just for the rate of incarceration and made it huge. But yeah, the devil's in the details for this kind of stuff. It can get very school marmy, very school boring, very fast.
But what's great is that your guides, when I've done the tours, we go to it, they bring it up, and then they ask like rhetorical questions, which I appreciated.
Right, we haven't actually updated it yet, but I'm glad that stuck with you. Those bars are like 1,000 pounds each, and there's enough concrete for it. We can add a bar in 2020. And the typical questions that our guides ask are, what do you want the 2020 bar to look like? Because it's going to look like something. Because it shows racial disparity on one side, and it shows the rate of incarceration on the other. And why is the United States so different? Because the edge shows all the countries, as you mentioned, the edge shows all the countries in the world and their rates of incarceration, and there's kind of no one in second place. And we're at the top, and there's just there's like 4 feet of empty space. Before you pick up, we're the second highest rate of incarceration in the world. So I'm so glad I stuck with you and made my day.
So thinking about timeline not just as audiovisual, but also potentially sculptural or interactive in some way. Ariel, yes.
A bunch of years ago, I know that Carmen Whalen used a number of photos that were available here in the archive to create. She was doing a series of books, which
That's the book we gave you guys.
Yeah.
Remember the little kind of photographic history
right.
of Puerto Ricans in Philadelphia?
That's right.
Yeah.
So she didn't use all the photos that were available, right?
Of course.
So yeah, because you gotta edit it down. If we're looking at sort of like major time periods or major slices of time, in order to create maps and in order to create the timeline, we need to figure out which photos we're going to use, because we got to pick the best ones from each time period, and then, at least in my mind, when I see it in my mind palace, it's like you have the photo, you have like a little blurb, and then you have the art, then you have the map, and you can have it on a board about as big as that. You can flip it around or something else. I think we can incorporate all of these ideas, but let's look at what we have first.
Sure.
And let's let the evidence, let's let the photos dictate how we put the thing together.
Maybe, sure.
Sure. And that's coming right out of the archival
Yeah.
work
Right,
that you
we'll come
guys
out of
did.
That's like a meeting in and of itself. Like, you have a bunch of people at the table, these are the best ones, float it around, and then,
So you envision kind of part of this program being the very generation of the product?
yeah, there's
somewhere?
gonna have to be at least one session of which photos get picked. Because you can't pick them all. And you don't want to pick ones that are or that have already been selected for like other media. You want to expose, at least I would think, new photos that the public.
Aren't we focusing on a time period as well?
I'm sorry, what?
Aren't we going to focus on a time period as well?
I don't know. I mean, it depends on, like, are we focusing on one time period, or are we going? When I see timeline, I think many time periods sandwiched together, and so picking things from like one or two things that are key photos, and then we build the exhibit sort of around that.
So you keep mentioning photos, but the idea of having a piece of artwork
Sure.
from the time, a quote,
Why not?
a particularly fascinating quote from the time.
I
Even a
don't think
document, if
I don't
it's
think
a
it's
short
mutually exclusive.
document.
I think we can throw all of these
You can
things in
just
there.
do all those
but
things.
but I think the question for me is, if we're focusing this exhibit on the Puerto Rican community, what are the historical exhibits, especially the visual ones, that we can use as a centerpiece? And I think oftentimes they're going to be mostly
The
photos.
Did you want to add something?
It just seems like you, not depending on how you want to focus the timeline, but if you were to say, I'm pulling this out of the air, 1948 to 2018, you could populate the timeline also with the oral histories from the 70s, with the updated oral histories, with the 25 print. I mean, you could merge everything, frankly, into the timeline, which is both historical artifact, oral history artifact, visual art artifact.
That would certainly make
So
it more
for the last few
interesting.
minutes, I want to also be sure we cover the topic of audience, because our format list here is a lot more extensive than
Yeah.
audience. Yes,
Audience,
Robert.
so I think there's a segue into intergenerational.
Okay.
You could have families, children, parents, grandparents, and maybe on rare occasions, great-grandparents, putting on a map of Philadelphia where they lived as a Puerto Rican family.
That's a great idea.
And you could also have impressions. So the different generations, maybe in one sentence, what's your impression of living in Philadelphia? And then having that dialogue within the family. Because it's more likely if kids and parents have a positive experience that way, they're more likely to come again.
That's a really interesting point, the idea of families and intergenerational, and thinking about where people have lived in a kind of bringing it to the mapping aspect as well as the chronology aspect.
Well, and since we're talking, I'm sorry.
Okay.
You sure? Thank you. Since we're talking about schools and children, I'm wondering whether such a thing could be portable in some way so that it could be an outreach tool as well.
Okay.
I don't know whether
It's
that's
been raised as a possibility.
possibility.
Yeah. Izzy, did you want to-
Sorry, go ahead.
Who was the artist that did the quilts?
Betty Lee Craft.
Yeah, in my alpaca project.
Okay.
It's interesting because she does this piece, which is one gigantic quilt. Now, I'm not saying we go and start doing quilts, but she focuses on a neighborhood. In other words, one thing is to do error, and the neighborhood, the errors. Because see this map here goes back to 1889. And she then found, and then she has a photograph, which, you know, that she found in the archive, this thing, that she was commissioned to do this. And it goes all the way around to the Rizzo era, all the way to looking at some, probably, the late 70s, I would say. So it's an interesting way that you can look at that piece and you don't have to, you know, be a historian, it kind of relates directly to you, because not only do you see a map of the location, it also speaks to who was there.
Oh, and it was also beautiful. So that
I captured it, and I always, you know, what I'm thinking is that you're right. I think we're looking at errors, right? The question and theme. Now here she has like a social justice theme. Usually we think of just history, right, in a more traditional sense. In this case, you know, she looked at a neighborhood that was changing, and she looks at racism, she looks at other things. reflected in the photographs that you got from the archive. So the question to the group is that I don't know if there are going to be themes in the historical timeline, because sometimes, those are things that people really are easy to relate to, right? As opposed to 1898, when the Rico was invaded, then you got all this, all this migration, then you had to think the 40s, and the big wave coming to, well, I don't know if that's really, we got books, we got stuff like that now that I think we can reference. But if we're going to use the material that at least some of it that I've seen, some photographs are great, and some of the articles are incredible to show the ignorance at the time of the host community. And for me, that's something that talks about dynamics between neighborhoods, how people, how the host community treated the incoming migrant, and then we bring it up to uptown now and show how that community, those neighborhoods are now. And we're not talking about homeless in neighborhood, by the way. We want to do like a quick talk about South Philly, Spring Gardens, right?
Yeah.
And what we call now Kensington and Hunting Park area.
Like for Richmond.
So you're bringing up important issues of sort of making it spatial, thinking about neighborhood, thinking about thematic instead of just kind of like date by date. Okay, these are all, and making it contemporary. These are all great points. Yeah, Carmen.
I also see here the opportunity to, as has been mentioned with the example of the Eastern Penitentiary, to make the connection with other, to make it sort of a parallel where what is happening in the Puerto Rican community is impacted by also what is happening, either in the country or the world. The Great Migration, before the Great War, First World War and the Second World War. So it provides, which are also moments of immigration of other groups. So that there is a potential for connecting, to the rest of the communities.
Okay, so shared immigrant experiences.
Yeah, to create some sort of parallels of the moments in history that are happening with the Puerto Rican community in Philadelphia, with what's happening in Philadelphia, or events in the world that are impacting that, but it's also impacting other communities.
Okay, thinking of those parallels.
Yeah.
Yes, Rosanna, I saw your hand up.
Another idea for audience could be churches within the various Puerto Rican communities. We then get into intergenerational. If we do it in the summertime, we don't have to worry, our teacher's going to go, and again, it's bringing HSP to people who maybe are not familiar with it. If we go and do a program in a church, imagine if we could even tie it in with we do it after service on a Sunday. We've got an audience, they don't have to travel, they're here already, just a possibility. And another thing, with making a timeline, we could maybe partnership with one of the local art schools. Let's partner with more. They can help us create, an interesting timeline, since we don't want to do quilts, or we don't want to steal HSP, and that's expensive too. So what can we do to make a timeline that's interesting with local art students? Which again, then is buy-in. More will say, hey, we have our student who created that piece. Go see it. So again, more audience, because now we're getting more students or whoever.
Okay. So thinking about bringing on board external sort of experts and community members to help create these things. Okay. Did you have to get
I know the word economic is in the grant quite a few times. So somewhere, maybe it wouldn't be this, we have to think about businesses, business people, industries, that they often have a history and they have exhibits. Maybe somehow offering to include Puerto Rican communities and workers and their story too. And that could be in the mapping. You could show where did the Puerto Rican people live, but also work, which was not always the same place.
Yep.
And that could be mapped also to show that mobility too. that you were not just staying in your own community, but there was some interaction with other communities, often through your job.
That's a really good point. And Tyre, for example, is definitely embedded in a business community, right? A Puerto Rican business community that's potentially something that could be taken advantage of in the context of a program like this. Do our technical advisors or anybody else have thoughts about what we've discussed so far in terms of spatial mapping, chronology, time frame, audience for that?
Don't forget that we have space, right? Like we have a beautiful space. And
Absolutely.
don't, your traditional exhibits and stuff like that, I mean, format-wise, may also work for certain audiences as well. I'm saying just because we have classroom, we have space, we have all sorts of technology, we have a theater. So I would urge people to think, some of it's already fitting in with the performances. You see what I'm saying? So we already have some space for this.
Yes.
Question is how it manifests itself, And we have the, I don't know what else is up here.
No, you're right. I mean, in the scope of the grant, we stay, a program in each of our locations, but we're not bound by that. But we certainly, can explore the options that are offered by our spaces, for sure, absolutely. Okay, I'm mindful of the fact that we've got about, 15 minutes or so left. Beth, did you?
Yeah, I have sort of two overarching questions about all three. Can I?
Oh, please.
Move to the conclusion?
Yeah, I was thinking, can we segue to our kind of wrapping things up? Anyone feel like they need to contribute something else? I don't want to shut anyone down. Yvette.
It's more like a question / so maybe more like a question, but as I was listening to everybody describe sort of the mapping, I am imagining some of these pictures and events in my head and sort of creating a visual thing. And I just wanted to add something that has not been mentioned, which is some of these people that come from Puerto Rico. For some of us, our Puerto Rican dream is to go back to the island and have a little casita in the rural countryside and live happily ever after. So I'm just wondering whether in that mapping, if the stories come out through those testimonials, I guess, if we are going to also include that sort of a circular migration, that not only to think of it as like a way out, but for some people, really, the connection with the island is very, very much alive, and some do want, and some actually do leave and go back. So just keep in mind that circularity of when we think about the mapping, because for some people it's very real, for some it's a dream.
Right. So to bear in mind the geography, not just of Philadelphia, but its relationship to the island of Puerto Rico.
Pertains to those stories as they come out, it might.
Oh, that's a really good point. Thank you. Okay, so let's sort of wrap up all of the wonderful things that we've gotten out today.
As I've been listening, beginning to kind of filter things, there were two questions that occurred to me across these. From the very beginning, you really hooked on the idea of youth and schools and reaching the next generation. My question is, if we were to do more than one thing, do you want all the things to have that as its main focus, or would you say, try to make that the focus for one and the primary focus, shall we say, and not the primary focus of the other? Or would you be happy if everything had to do, like all the programs we do, its primary audience was youth? Do you have a strong feeling about that? One way or the other?
I would prefer a balance. Unless the proposal was made to deal, there's a crisis in this community that magnifies. There's crisis in the nation and so on. But so I think we have to look at workers, we have to look at young people, we have to look at schools, what's happening. So the audience, I think, has to be as multi-diverse as possible. And the engagement to youth, I think one key project should be, because I think that's for me, but I think if we're gonna do 2 or 3, then it should be balanced out somewhere, because it also will speak to other themes and audiences.
So
That
at
might
least
say.
one on youth, but not
One,
necessarily.
right,
Okay,
right.
that's your vote.
I agree with Izzy. I think that one should be for youth and the other one should be intergenerational.
Yeah.
I think that intergenerational, a strong focus on intergenerational for the one in the summertime, because we need the older people to tell the history, and we need the people in the middle to know about it, and the young people to hopefully carry it forward.
So I see a lot of heads. Okay. And the other is, for many of these, we've talked about what I still consider programs, but they're not traditional programs in their format. So they're online, or they're out in the city, or they're going into schools. If we do things that have an online component, or they're a podcast, there's something ephemeral, shall we say. Should we also plan some sort of kickoff event or opening? I don't know how to exactly word it, not knowing what it's going to be. But should there be some physical program too? Because if so, then we have to calculate that into budget and time.
Yes.
Okay, so you were not saying not to do that by, okay. Those were the 2 clarifying questions I had. Thank you.
Segue to what we're doing next time. All right. Well, yeah. Sorry.
Actually, then.
Let's share the magic microphone.
Well, I was going to say, well, here, I can say it to the group.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll try this again. The other thing is an observer listening. It may have been because of the order in which things were presented, but the energy in the room really was a lot more with the first option than with the later options. I wonder if that was a true reading of how people felt about the options. We at one point talked about whether we'd have you vote on things. I'm not going to ask you to vote on them, but I just want to get a sense of the reading of the room. Is that a true thing, or was that just because it happened to come first and, right out of the gate people were talking more?
I think it's that the first thing, it's like, oh, everybody has an idea. And a lot of the ideas that were in the first can be integrated for the second and the third.
So
I'm
they
not going to
just got
keep
said
repeating
first.
myself.
I think it was more of a case of things being subsumed into the second and third.
So it was just that they got
Maybe,
out on the table first. It wasn't a sense that the first thing was in some ways just really so much more exciting than the others.
I don't think so. I personally don't think so.
That true for every... Okay, thanks. That was the other question.
Okay, great. Awesome. So really in the few minutes that we have left, I wanted to just sort of wrap up with what we've done today and set the stage for what comes next. So as we discussed from the beginning, today was about trying to begin honing down all of our ideas and topics generated from research, discussions, and field trips, and think concretely about program format and audience. And I think we've done a lot of great work towards that today. We still have more fine-tuning and honing to do on a organizational level, and that's where our next meeting comes in. So our next meeting will be in December, and we are going to bring to you, as HSP and Tyre, some concrete programming kind of formats and budgets, right? To try and put together the concepts, formatting, audience, topics that you guys have brought to us and put them in black and white. And we're presenting them to you for your feedback and response, right? And we'll also think about the other piece that Beth did bring up, which is outreach and marketing. Right? How do we make people aware of these programs, and how is that integrated into the bigger picture of the grant? And we want to really, the December meeting will be the concluding, the last time we all meet together as a group, which is very bittersweet because this has been a wonderful process. But we really want to present you with kind of the fruits of our labors, inspired by everything that you've given us for your feedback, and then kind of celebrate how far we've come together in this process of, it's a very experimental process, so we really appreciate you guys learning along with us, because we're certainly not the experts on how to do this. We're all sort of learning together. So we want to kind of wrap things up when we meet next time and look towards actually putting these programs together. Is there anything else that I should mention that I have forgotten at this stage? Yeah, Carmen.
So I think also the other thing that we extracted from the last conversation was some central themes that impacted, a lot of people as you were talking about what attracted you, and there was some, and I'm not going to remember them all, but cultural identity and, neighborhood and what forms neighborhood. So as we define these things, hopefully we'll be able to incorporate some of those central
absolutely
criteria to
and yes, and to reiterate what Carmen said at the beginning, the process doesn't end here. Right? This has been an experiment for our two organizations to try to embed audience in generating program ideas. But these aren't going to be the only two or three programs that come out of all of our conversations. Both HSP and Taller, I know, have gained so much from listening to you, learning from you, and being a part of this whole process. So it doesn't end here with this group. I definitely want to emphasize that. So are there any other questions or concerns? It's December 8th.
It's December 8th, our usual 10 to 12. We're going to do it here. It's out of sync for the back and forth just because this stuff was the added meeting. Part of it, that meeting also, is going to be just a celebration of all the hard work you did. Because it is a sense of an ending of a phase of the grant, but we don't want you to go away. We hope that we'll be able to call on you and that you'll want to be involved as the programs happen. And of course, we see you at the programs and have you bring everybody to launch parties or whatever they are. But that's the other part of the December meeting. So we'll have the present to you for your review. Oh, you forgot this, you got that wrong, please add this. We'll be, okay, if you're going to do this, some ideas for marketing, and then a party.
And that'll be here, you say?
And that'll be here.
So are you saying that after that phase, then staff takes over for the actual development of the...
Right, in other words, when it comes down to having to, write contracts for speakers or contracts for people who will put it online or, whatever those things. We're going to do all that nitty gritty. You don't have to do that nitty gritty.
But what about the design of the project itself?
If you want to be involved and work on like a committee, that's certainly possible. But we didn't want to put that on anybody, that level of nitty gritty work. The way the grant was written. That doesn't mean you can't, as I say, volunteer to be involved. We'd be happy to have people's help. And in fact, I'm sure we will get to places where we're sort of stuck and we'll reach out with questions via, email or phone to particular people or even the whole group to say, oh, we forgot to ask you this question. What do you think about this? That kind of thing.
I just wanted to have one last quote. I read this quote from Dr. Miles Monroe, and he says, if we don't remind the young people of their history, they will destroy our future from lack of knowledge, because history tends to repeat itself. And so, Harriet Tubman said, I could have freed so many more slaves if they only knew they were no longer slaves, because in their mind, they still had a slave mentality, yet they were freed. So we can't, the reason why I focus on the youth is because they are our future. They're our future, and history plays a big role in their future, and we don't want them to continue to make the same, mistakes that we made in the past for today. So they need to know the history so they're not doing something that's already been done.
And that history is more accurate. It has a more contemporary, accurate view of history too. Right?
Absolutely.
Depends on what
just maybe as a funny response to that is that unfortunately the people that today are trying to repeat history is the elders that are directing this country. But what I was is actually that on December 7th, which is the day before the next meeting, if you really want to celebrate and participate in a cultural Puerto Rican tradition, come to our fundraiser on December 7th. It's a Parranda Christmas event with music and food and all kinds of things. So we'll share that information with all of you.
So it's lots of fun.
And then you'll come back, sleepy the following day.
But you'll feel in a good spirit.
But in the spirit of Christmas.
Yeah. Music, food, drink, parrandas are great.
Yeah, I want to ask you that too. For those of you who don't know, I am the new education director now at Taller. Yes, our kids are performing, and their theme this year is called "In the Pursuit of Liberty." It's freedom, her title. Each kid in that program is doing a piece about themselves, what they've been through this process, and the whole theme is called Injustice. That whole piece is going to come to life. All 4 classes are going to tie into one curriculum. I want you guys to see this. It's going to be pretty strong, yes. I don't know the date of that one. But yeah,
we'll reach out.
It would be December 15th, the following Friday.
I thought we ended the week before. I'm not sure. You'll get the
We'll keep you in the loop. We'll keep you
Following
posted.
Friday is December 14th.
Okay. For some reason,
But anyway, you'll get
yeah. And it is my first kind of running show, even though I've been there behind the scenes a lot. But I am really proud this year because Taller's been an organization with me for a very long time. My kids went through the program. Now my grandchildren are going through the program. So when we talk into Genturo, I can't even pronounce the word. It is learning through the cultural awareness of ourselves. And it was important for me, and that's why my kids went through the program, because I am from Puerto Rico. I am Puerto Rican, but I wasn't born and raised in Puerto Rico. I came here and I learned my history through Taller.
Thank you, Marilyn. That's wonderful. And congratulations. Thank you all so much for your time. Grab some snacks on the way out, and we'll see you in December. We'll be in touch with all the details about the meeting via email. And thank you again to all of our staff and technical advisors for sharing your expertise and your time with us. Thank you all.